The crystal chandeliers of the Hampton Manor sparkled like stars against the evening sky, their light reflecting off the polished marble floors where Sarah Mitchell stood, her worn waitress uniform a stark contrast to the elegant evening gowns that swirled around her. At 23, she had already learned that life rarely dealt a fair hand, but nothing could have prepared her for what would unfold that fateful night in Newport, Rhode Island. "More champagne, miss?" she asked, balancing her serving tray with practiced ease as she approached a group of socialites. Among them stood Bradley Winchester III, the mansion's heir and her secret boyfriend of 6 months. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah's heart fluttered with hope. Tonight was supposed to be special. Bradley had promised to finally introduce her to his family. "Oh, look who it is," came a sharp voice that cut through the ambient chatter like a knife. Victoria Winchester, Bradley's mother, emerged from the crowd, her designer dress worth more than Sarah's yearly salary. "The help seems to be getting quite familiar with the guests, wouldn't you say, Bradley?" Sarah's fingers tightened around the serving tray as she watched Bradley's face transform. Gone was the warm smile she had grown to love, replaced by a cold mask of indifference that sent chills down her spine. "Mother, please," Bradley said, but his tone wasn't defensive, it was apologetic. "I can explain." Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a cruel smile. "Oh, there's nothing to explain, darling. Miss Mitchell here seems to have developed quite an imagination. Did you really think my son would seriously involve himself with someone of your station?" The room grew quiet, dozens of wealthy guests turning to watch the unfolding drama. Sarah stood frozen, her world crumbling around her as Bradley stepped away from her, joining his mother's side. "I told you this would happen," Bradley muttered, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "I warned you not to come to this party. Whatever you thought was between us, it was just a bit of fun." Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of these people who looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain." But what happened next would change everything. "Oh, and one more thing," Victoria added, reaching into her clutch. She pulled out a check and held it delicately between two manicured fingers. "For your discretion. We wouldn't want any unfortunate rumors circulating, would we?" The check fluttered in the air between them, $100,000 written in elegant script, the price Victoria Winchester thought would buy Sarah's silence and dignity. In that moment, something broke inside Sarah, but something else was born. She looked at the check, then at Bradley's averted gaze, and finally at Victoria's triumphant smirk. With steady hands, she placed her serving tray on a nearby table and straightened her back. "Keep your money, Mrs. Winchester," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong despite the trembling in her heart. "Some things can't be bought." As she turned to leave, she bumped into someone, Daniel Crawford, a renowned investigative journalist known for exposing corruption among the elite. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. What Sarah didn't know as she walked out of Hampton Manor that night was that her story would become more than just a tale of heartbreak. In her purse lay a small USB drive, evidence of the Winchester family's darkest secrets that Bradley had carelessly left in her apartment during one of their rendezvous. Secrets that would shake Newport's high society to its core. As she drove home in her beaten-up Honda Civic, wiping away tears with one hand while clutching the steering wheel with the other, Sarah made a decision. The Winchesters had tried to break her, thinking she was just another disposable pawn in their game of power and privilege. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Back at Hampton Manor, Victoria Winchester raised her champagne glass in a toast, celebrating what she thought was another perfect display of power. Yet in the shadows of the party, Daniel Crawford was already making calls, and somewhere in the city, Sarah's younger sister Emma was opening her laptop, ready to help her sister expose the truth that lay beneath the glittering surface of Newport's elite. The game had only just begun, and Sarah Mitchell, the girl they had underestimated, was about to become their worst nightmare. The morning after the Hampton Manor disaster, Sarah sat in her tiny apartment in the less glamorous part of Newport, staring at her laptop screen with trembling hands. The USB drive she'd found in her apartment weeks ago, the one Bradley had frantically searched for during his last visit, contained more than just business documents. Spreadsheets, offshore account details, and emails revealed a web of corruption that went far beyond simple tax evasion. "You need to see this," Emma said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. At 19, Sarah's sister was a computer science prodigy on a scholarship at Brown University. The Winchesters aren't just rich, they're criminals. They've been systematically destroying small businesses across Rhode Island, forcing families into bankruptcy, and then buying their properties for pennies on the dollar. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another message from Bradley, the 10th since last night. We need to talk. Please. What happened at the party? It's complicated. Delete it, Emma said firmly, not looking up from the screen. He's just trying to damage control. Look at this, remember the Anderson family? Their restaurant that mysteriously burned down last year? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The Andersons had been regular customers at the diner where she worked her second job. Their daughter Jenny had been in Sarah's high school class. After the fire, Mr. Anderson had suffered a heart attack, and the family had been forced to move away. The Winchesters were behind it, Emma whispered, pulling up documents that showed wire transfers and emails between Victoria Winchester and various shell companies. They wanted the waterfront property for their new development project. A knock at the door made both sisters jump. Sarah approached cautiously, looking through the peephole to see Daniel Crawford, the journalist from the party, standing in the hallway with a grim expression. "I know what you have," he said when she opened the door. "And I know you're in danger. The Winchesters have destroyed people for far less than what's on that drive." Sarah invited him in, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way he constantly checked his phone. "How did you find me?" "I've been investigating the Winchesters for years," Daniel explained, accepting the coffee Emma offered. "But I could never get solid evidence. They're too careful, too well-connected. Until now." He pulled out his own laptop, showing them a series of photographs, Bradley with various young women, all in service industry jobs, all eventually disappearing from Newport with substantial bank deposits in their accounts. "You weren't the first, Sarah," Daniel said gently. "But you could be the last." Bradley's relationships were part of their strategy, getting close to people who might accidentally see or hear too much, then paying them off or, worse. Sarah felt sick. Worse? Daniel's expression darkened. "Remember Lisa Torres? The barista who went missing 2 years ago after dating Bradley?" "They said she moved to California," Emma interjected. "Did she?" Daniel pulled up another document. "Because according to these records, someone used her social security number to open bank accounts in the Cayman Islands 3 months after she disappeared. The same pattern appears with at least 3 other women." A heavy silence fell over the room. Sarah thought about all the times Bradley had asked about her family, her dreams, her financial struggles. How he'd seemed so interested in her work schedule, the layout of her apartment building, her relationships with her co-workers. "We need to go public," Sarah declared, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's not that simple," Daniel warned. "The Winchesters own half the judges in Rhode Island. Victoria Winchester plays golf with the governor. We need to be smart about this." Emma suddenly straightened in her chair. "Someone's trying to access our network." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "They're good, but I'm better. They're using an IP address registered to Winchester Industries." "They know," Daniel said, already moving to close the curtains. "We need to move. Now." As if on cue, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside the apartment building. 2 men in suits stepped out, their purposeful stride sending chills down Sarah's spine. "Pack what you need," Daniel ordered, already calling someone on his phone. "I have a safe house in Providence." "Emma, grab your equipment." "Sarah, the USB drive, where is it?" Sarah reached for her mother's locket around her neck, the one piece of jewelry she had left from before the cancer took her. Inside, nestled where a photo should have been, was the tiny drive. As they hurried down the fire escape, Sarah caught a glimpse of Bradley stepping out of another car, his handsome face twisted with worry, or was it guilt? Their eyes met across the parking lot, and for a moment, she saw something like regret flash across his features. But it was too late for regret. The Sarah who had fallen for his charm, who had dreamed of a fairy tale ending, died the night before at Hampton Manor. This Sarah, the one clutching evidence of generations of corruption around her neck, had a different story to tell. Emma's laptop chimed with an incoming email as they piled into Daniel's car. "It's from someone inside Winchester Industries," she gasped. "Someone calling themselves Conscience." They want to help us." As Daniel's car sped through the streets of Newport, Sarah looked back at her apartment building, where the men in suits were now running up the stairs. She thought about Lisa Torres and the others who had disappeared, about the Anderson family and their destroyed dreams, about all the lives the Winchesters had casually ruined in their pursuit of more wealth and power. "What's our next move?" Emma asked, clutching her laptop. Sarah touched her mother's locket, feeling the hard edge of the USB drive inside. "We're going to do what Mom always taught us," she said firmly. "We're going to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." Daniel smiled grimly as he turned onto the highway. "Then let's make sure we do it right. I have contacts at the New York Times and Washington Post. But first, we need to stay alive long enough to tell the story." The sun was rising over Newport Harbor, casting long shadows across the water. Somewhere in one of those mansions on the hill, Victoria Winchester was probably already planning her next move. But this time, she had underestimated her opponent. Because Sarah Mitchell had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Daniel's safe house in Providence turned out to be a modest brownstone owned by his elderly aunt, Margaret Crawford. A former civil rights activist in the 1960s, she welcomed them with warm coffee and a steely determination that reminded Sarah of her late mother. "The guest rooms are upstairs," Margaret said, leading them through a house filled with books and protest memorabilia. "And don't worry about the windows, they're bulletproof. A gift from my paranoid nephew after that expose he did on the mob last year. Aunt Maggie has been my backup plan for years," Daniel explained, setting up his laptop on the dining room table. No one would think to look for fugitives in a 75-year-old retired librarian's home. Emma had already converted a corner of the living room into a makeshift command center, multiple screens glowing with data streams and code. "The email from Conscience came through a sophisticated encryption channel," she reported. "Whoever they are, they know their stuff." Sarah opened the message again. "To those who seek the truth about the Winchesters. I've worked inside Winchester Industries for 15 years. What you discovered is just the tip of the iceberg. The Anderson restaurant fire? Child's play compared to what they did to the St. Clair Children's Hospital. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Providence Public Library, True Crime section. Come alone. Conscience." "It's probably a trap," Daniel warned, but Sarah could see the journalistic spark in his eyes. "Not necessarily," Emma interjected, still typing furiously. "I've been analyzing the email's metadata. It was sent from inside Winchester Industries' main server, specifically from the legal department's secure network. Only someone with high-level access could have done that." A breaking news alert flashed across one of Emma's screens. Everyone froze as Bradley Winchester's face appeared, standing at a podium outside Hampton Manor. "My relationship with Sarah Mitchell was real," Bradley was saying, his voice practiced and smooth. "But she betrayed my trust, stole confidential company documents, and is now attempting to blackmail my family. We are offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to her location." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as Bradley continued, "Sarah, if you're watching this, please come forward. We can work this out. I still care about you." Margaret switched off the TV with a disgusted snort. "That boy's got his mother's eyes, and I don't mean the color." "Wait," Emma said suddenly. "Look at this." She pulled up a series of financial records from the USB drive. The St. Clair Children's Hospital closure, it wasn't just about real estate. They were running some kind of medical research program there, off the books. Something called Project Phoenix. Daniel leaned in closer. "I remember that hospital. It specialized in experimental treatments for terminal childhood cancers. The closure was sudden, dozens of kids had to be transferred mid-treatment. Some didn't survive the move." Sarah's hands began to shake. "Our mother was treated there," she whispered. "Before they closed. She was part of an experimental program that was supposed to help with her stage 4 breast cancer. But then the hospital shut down, and..." Emma's face went pale. 3 weeks later, she was gone. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah remembered those final days, their mother's rapid decline after being forced to switch treatments, the mysterious doctors who kept assuring them everything was following protocol. A notification pinged on Emma's laptop. Someone's accessing Mom's old medical records right now, she announced. From Winchester Industries' secure server. Can you get in? Daniel asked. Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard. Already done. Oh my God. She covered her mouth with her hand. Mom wasn't just a patient. She was a test subject. Project Phoenix wasn't about curing cancer, it was about testing experimental drugs. Drugs that hadn't been approved by the FDA. Sarah felt the room spin. They used her as a guinea pig? They used everyone in that ward, Emma continued, her voice shaking with rage as she read. The hospital closure wasn't about real estate, it was about covering their tracks. There are hundreds of names here, all terminal patients. They were testing multiple experimental compounds, documenting the results. Sarah, look at the signature on these authorization forms. There it was, Victoria Winchester's elegant scrawl at the bottom of each document, along with a note, proceed with Phase 3 trials. Liability forms are prepared. Those liability forms, Daniel said grimly, were probably the papers they made patients sign during transfer, releasing the hospital from any responsibility for what happened after the closure. A loud knock at the front door made everyone jump. Margaret calmly walked to a side table and pulled out a small revolver. Mrs. Crawford, a familiar voice called. It's Grace Chen from the district attorney's office. I need to speak with you. Daniel relaxed slightly. Grace is one of my sources. She's clean. Grace Chen, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, entered the house with urgent news. The Winchesters are making moves, she said without preamble. They're trying to get emergency court orders to seize all their company's medical research records for national security reasons. Whatever you're going to do with what you have, you need to do it fast. Why the rush? Sarah asked. Because, Grace replied, pulling out her phone to show them another news alert, Bradley Winchester just announced his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. His campaign platform? Healthcare reform and medical research funding. Emma's laptop chimed again, another message from Conscience, don't come to the library. They know. Go to St. Clair's abandoned hospital instead. The real records are still there, hidden in the old oncology ward. Get them before they do. You have 12 hours. Sarah looked at the faces around her, her brilliant sister, the dedicated journalist, the seasoned prosecutor, and the fierce elderly activist. Then she thought of her mother, of Lisa Torres, of Jenny Anderson's father, and all the other lives the Winchesters had casually destroyed in their pursuit of power and profit. We're going to that hospital, she declared. Tonight. It's dangerous, Daniel warned. The place has been abandoned for years. More dangerous than letting them get away with this? Sarah countered. More dangerous than letting Bradley Winchester get into the Senate and do this to more families? Grace checked her watch. I can delay the court orders for maybe 24 hours, but that's it. Whatever you're going to find there, find it fast. As they began planning their midnight mission to St. Clair's, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, her and Bradley at the beach last summer, laughing in the sun. Below it was a message, remember who you're dealing with, Sarah. Some things are better left buried. Like Lisa Torres. Sarah deleted the message, her resolve hardening. The Winchesters had taken her mother, her trust, and her heart. But they wouldn't take the truth. Not this time. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Providence, promising a long and dangerous night ahead. The abandoned St. Clair Children's Hospital loomed against the stormy night sky, its broken windows like dark, hollow eyes staring down at the small group gathered in the shadow of the emergency entrance. Rain had begun to fall, adding to the building's haunting atmosphere. Security patrols passed by every 30 minutes, Grace informed them, checking her phone. We have a window coming up in 2 minutes. Sarah pulled her mother's locket from beneath her shirt, touching it for courage. Emma squeezed her sister's hand, both of them remembering the countless hours they'd spent in this building during their mother's final months. Third floor, East Wing, Daniel murmured, consulting the blueprint Grace had obtained. That's where the oncology ward was. Emma shouldered her backpack full of tech equipment. Once we're inside, I can tap into any remaining systems. Even disconnected servers might still have local data. 10 seconds, Grace whispered as the security car turned the corner. They waited in tense silence until its headlights disappeared around the building. Using the key card Grace had borrowed from city records, they slipped inside. The emergency exit's rusted hinges groaned, the sound echoing through empty corridors that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and decay. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating abandoned wheelchairs and toppled floor stands. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, and their footsteps echoed on the cracked linoleum floors. Mom's room was down there, Sarah whispered as they passed the second floor, pointing toward a darkened hallway. Her voice caught in her throat as memories flooded back, the beeping monitors, the forced smiles, the whispered conversations with doctors who wouldn't quite meet their eyes. A sudden crash from above made them all freeze. "We're not alone," Daniel said quietly, switching off his flashlight. Emma quickly pulled out her tablet. "I'm picking up active power usage on the third floor. Someone's already here." They crept up the stairs, staying close to the wall. As they reached the third floor, voices drifted down the corridor, hushed but urgent. "Find those files," a familiar voice ordered. "Victoria wants everything cleared out before the court orders come through." Sarah's heart stopped. "Bradley." "Let me handle this," Grace whispered, pulling out her badge. "You three find the records." Before anyone could stop her, Grace strode around the corner. "This is a restricted area," her authoritative voice rang out. "I'm from the DA's office. Care to explain what you're doing here?" The distraction worked. As Bradley and his men turned toward Grace's voice, Sarah, Emma, and Daniel slipped past the adjacent hallway, making their way toward the old oncology ward. The ward's double doors were chained but not locked. Inside, the moonlight filtering through broken windows cast strange shadows across abandoned hospital beds and dusty medical equipment. "The records room should be through there," Daniel pointed to a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Emma immediately set to work on the electronic lock while Sarah stood guard. Through the walls, they could hear Grace keeping Bradley and his men occupied with legal jargon and threats of obstruction charges. "I'm in," Emma announced after a tense minute. "But someone's already accessed these files recently." "Very recently." The records room was smaller than Sarah expected, with rows of filing cabinets and a single desk supporting an old computer terminal. Emma connected her equipment to the computer while Daniel began searching the files. Here, Daniel pulled out a thick folder labeled Project Phoenix, Phase 3. Wait. He stopped, staring at something behind Sarah. Sarah turned slowly to find a woman standing in the doorway, middle-aged, wearing a janitor's uniform, her face hauntingly familiar. "Lisa Torres," Sarah breathed. The woman, Lisa, quickly closed the door behind her. "I'm the one who sent you the messages," she said quietly. "I've been working here as a cleaner for the past 2 years, waiting for someone brave enough to expose them." "But you disappeared," Sarah said. "Everyone thought." "That's what they wanted people to think," Lisa's face hardened. "I discovered what they were doing here, using desperate terminal patients to test illegal drugs, falsifying results, covering up deaths. When I threatened to expose them, Victoria gave me a choice: disappear with a new identity and a maintenance job, or disappear permanently." A commotion outside interrupted them, Bradley's voice, closer now. "Check every room. They have to be here somewhere." Lisa moved quickly to a filing cabinet, pulling it away from the wall to reveal a hidden door. "This leads to the old hospital administrator's private elevator. Take everything you've found. I'll hold them off." "Come with us," Sarah pleaded. Lisa shook her head. "My life here is over anyway. But first, you need to see this." She pulled out a phone, showing them a video. "I recorded this the night they shut down the hospital. It's Victoria Winchester ordering the destruction of evidence, and explicitly discussing how they chose which patients would receive the real experimental treatments and which would get placebos." Emma's tablet chimed. "Download complete. I have everything from the server." Footsteps thundered down the hall. "Go!" Lisa urged, pushing them toward the hidden door. The elevator opens into the basement. There's a tunnel that leads to the old nurse's dormitory. Just as Sarah slipped through the door, it burst open. Bradley stood there, his expensive suit soaked with rain, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Sarah, stop," he called out. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I understand that your family killed my mother. That you used me to spy on potential whistleblowers. That you're just like your mother, willing to destroy anyone who gets in your way." "It's more complicated than that," Bradley stepped forward. "These treatments, they're saving lives now. The FDA approval process would have taken years. Sometimes you have to break rules to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Lisa stepped between them. "Like what you did to Jenny Anderson's father? To all those children who died during the transfer? To Sarah's mother?" A flash of lightning illuminated Bradley's face, and for a moment, Sarah saw something crack in his perfect facade. But then Grace's voice rang out from the hallway, "NPDF. Everyone freeze." In the chaos that followed, Sarah, Emma, and Daniel slipped away through the hidden passage, clutching the evidence that would bring down an empire. Behind them, they heard Bradley's angry shout, Lisa's defiant response, and the sound of justice finally catching up to the Winchester family. As they emerged into the rain-soaked night, Sarah looked back at St. Clair's dark silhouette. Somewhere in that building, Lisa Torres was finally telling her story to Grace Chen, while Bradley Winchester was learning that some things, like truth and justice, really couldn't be bought. Thunder rolled across Providence as they made their way back to Margaret's house, their precious cargo of evidence secure. The next morning's headlines were already writing themselves in Sarah's mind, the poor girl who revealed the cruel truth about the rich, but this was more than just a story of revenge. It was about justice, about giving voice to those who had been silenced, about standing up to power no matter the cost. The storm was far from over, but for the first time since that night at Hampton Manor, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected, hope. Dawn broke over Providence as Sarah, Emma, and Daniel burst into Margaret's brownstone, soaked from the storm and breathless from their escape. The elderly woman was waiting with fresh coffee and a burner phone in her hand. "Grace just called," Margaret announced. "Lisa Torres is in protective custody. And you all need to see this." She turned up the volume on her vintage television, where a breaking news banner flashed across the screen, Winchester Industries heir Bradley Winchester arrested on multiple charges, Victoria Winchester calls emergency board meeting. "They're trying to get ahead of the story," Daniel said, already pulling out his laptop. "We need to move faster." Emma connected her equipment to secure servers while Sarah spread the physical documents across Margaret's dining table. The evidence they'd gathered painted a picture more horrifying than they'd imagined. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a memo dated 3 years ago. "They didn't just experiment on terminal patients. They deliberately falsified survival rates to get more funding. Every miracle recovery they reported was carefully orchestrated, they only gave the real treatment to patients they knew had the highest survival chances." "And the others?" Margaret asked softly. "Were given placebos," Emma finished, her voice breaking. "Like Mom." They called it necessary cost management in their internal reports. Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from one of his newspaper contacts. "Victoria Winchester is holding a press conference in an hour. They're going to try to spin this, probably paint Bradley as a rogue element who acted without the board's knowledge." "Not if we release this first," Emma said, holding up her tablet. She'd been analyzing the video Lisa Torres had given them. "I've verified its authenticity. It's definitely Victoria Winchester in this footage, and she explicitly orders the falsification of medical records." Sarah stared at the face of the woman who had humiliated her at Hampton Manor, who had seen her mother as nothing more than a disposable test subject. "What's our next move?" Before anyone could answer, Margaret's security system beeped. Someone was approaching the house. Through the surveillance cameras, they watched as a sleek black car pulled up. A familiar figure stepped out. "Catherine Winchester," Daniel breathed. "Bradley's sister." Catherine Winchester was everything her mother was, elegant, poised, and ruthless, but with one key difference: she was the only Winchester who had publicly opposed the hospital's closure 3 years ago, resigning from the board in protest. Let her in, Sarah decided, despite Daniel's concerned look. Catherine entered like a storm in designer clothes, her perfect composure cracking only slightly when she saw the evidence spread across the table. "I knew they were monsters," she said without preamble, but even I didn't know the full extent. She placed a USB drive on the table. This contains every email, every memo, every decision my mother made regarding Project Phoenix. I've been gathering evidence for years, but I never had enough to go public. Why help us now? Sarah asked. Catherine's perfectly maintained facade crumbled slightly. Because my daughter was in St. Clair's pediatric ward when they shut it down. Clara was 7, fighting leukemia. They transferred her to Boston General, claiming she'd get better care there. Her voice caught. She died during the transfer. Mother claimed it was unavoidable, just bad luck. Now I know better. The weight of this revelation hung heavy in the room. Victoria Winchester hadn't even spared her own granddaughter. The press conference, Catherine continued, checking her Rolex. Mother plans to announce Bradley's removal from the company and a full internal investigation, which means they're destroying evidence as we speak. But she doesn't know about Lisa Torres, or about Clara's real medical records. Emma was already incorporating Catherine's files into their evidence. This is everything we need. Emails showing Victoria personally selecting which patients would receive placebos, financial records of payoffs to medical staff, even surveillance footage from the hospital's last day. Sarah's phone suddenly lit up with a text from Grace. Victoria knows Catherine is with you. Winchester security teams are mobilizing. Get out now. As if on cue, they heard cars pulling up outside. Margaret calmly walked to a painting on the wall, swinging it aside to reveal a safe. She pulled out several passports and cash. The tunnel entrance is in the basement, she said, handing out the documents. It leads to the old Underground Railroad network. Daniel knows the way to the safe house in Boston. You knew this might happen, Sarah realized. Margaret smiled grimly. I've been helping my nephew hide whistleblowers for 30 years, dear. The Winchesters aren't the first powerful family we've taken on. Catherine stepped to the window, watching as men in dark suits approached the house. My mother's head of security is with them. We have maybe 2 minutes. The evidence? Emma asked, clutching her laptop. Already uploading to secure servers, Daniel confirmed. Multiple copies, multiple locations. Even if they get us, the story survives. Sarah grabbed her mother's locket, then paused. She turned to Catherine. Why should we trust you? You're still a Winchester. Catherine pulled out her phone, showing them a photo of a smiling little girl with bright eyes and no hair. Because Clara deserved better. Because your mother deserved better. Because every patient they sacrificed for profit deserved better. And because the Winchester name shouldn't mean what my mother has made it mean. The sound of breaking glass from upstairs spurred them into action. As they hurried toward the basement, Sarah glanced at the TV one last time. Victoria Winchester was stepping up to a podium outside Winchester Industries headquarters, her face a mask of concerned motherly grief. The performance of her life, Catherine muttered. She always was a better actress than mother. In the basement, Margaret quickly revealed a hidden door behind decades of stored furniture. This tunnel hasn't been used since the Civil War, she explained, but freedom seekers still need it, don't they? As they disappeared into the darkness, Sarah heard Victoria Winchester's voice drift down from the TV upstairs. As a mother, I am deeply shocked and saddened by my son's actions. She's good, Catherine said bitterly as they hurried through the narrow passage. By the time she's done, everyone will believe Bradley acted alone. Just like they believed Clara's death was unavoidable. Just like they believed Lisa Torres moved to California. Not this time, Sarah replied firmly. This time, we have the truth. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the Winchester security team searching the house. But ahead lay Boston, and with it, the chance to finally expose decades of corruption and cruelty. Sarah touched her mother's locket one last time as they emerged into the gray morning light. The storm had passed, but an even bigger one was about to break over the Winchester family, and this time, all their money and power couldn't hold back the flood of truth that was coming. The safe house in Boston turned out to be a penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor, owned by a media mogul who owed Daniel Crawford several favors. As they settled into the luxurious space, the irony wasn't lost on Sarah. They were hiding from the rich and accommodations that rivaled Hampton Manor's opulence. We're trending on Twitter, Emma announced, her eyes fixed on her laptop screen. Hashtag Winchestergate is exploding. Someone leaked photos of Bradley's arrest. Catherine Winchester stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her designer clothes still muddy from the tunnel escape. Mother's press conference was a disaster, she said, showing them her phone. The video showed Victoria Winchester being confronted by reporters about Lisa Torres's sudden reappearance. Mrs. Winchester, how do you respond to allegations that your family threatened and forced Lisa Torres into hiding? Victoria's composed facade had cracked slightly. These are baseless accusations. My family has always. And what about Clara Winchester? Another reporter shouted. Your own granddaughter? The footage showed Victoria's face turning white before her security team rushed her off the stage. The board is meeting in emergency session, Catherine informed them. I just received this from my contact. She held up an email. They're planning to throw Bradley under the bus completely, claim he orchestrated everything without the board's knowledge. They're even preparing documents showing he embezzled money for Project Phoenix without authorization. They're sacrificing the heir to save the queen, Daniel mused, already typing furiously on his laptop. But we have proof that Victoria was calling the shots. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Bradley's talking. Wants to make a deal. Says he has more evidence about Victoria's involvement in other projects beyond St. Clair's. He's turning on his own mother, Sarah said, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Despite everything, part of her still remembered the Bradley who had made her laugh, who had seemed so different from his family. Bradley was always the weak link, Catherine said coldly. Mother knew it, that's why she kept him close, controlled every aspect of his life. Even his relationships were calculated. Sarah felt her face flush with anger and humiliation, but Catherine continued, don't blame yourself. I watched her orchestrate these scenarios for years. Bradley would date someone from a lower social class, someone who might have access to sensitive information through their work. Mother would let it play out until she was sure no useful intelligence remained, then stage a dramatic scene to end it. Like the party at Hampton Manor, Sarah realized. Exactly. She'd done it so many times, it was practically choreographed. But you. Catherine's lips curved in a slight smile, you didn't follow the script. You were supposed to take the check and disappear. Instead, you became their worst nightmare. Emma suddenly sat up straighter. We've got movement. Winchester Industries just filed an emergency injunction to prevent any media outlets from publishing stolen corporate documents. They're desperate, Daniel said. They know once this goes public, there's no coming back. A breaking news alert flashed across the TV. Winchester Industries board member found dead, police investigating possible suicide. Robert Chen, Catherine breathed. He was head of the medical research division during Project Phoenix. Suicide? Sarah asked skeptically. Mother's favorite solution, Catherine's voice was bitter. When someone becomes a liability, they tend to have convenient accidents or sudden urges to end their lives. Grace called Daniel's secure line. Chen's death changes everything, she said when they put her on speaker. We need to move now. His death means sealed files can be opened as part of a criminal investigation. I'm getting a warrant as we speak. Wait, Emma interrupted, her face pale as she stared at her screen. Someone just tried to access Mom's old medical records again. But this time, they're trying to alter them. Sarah leaned over her sister's shoulder, watching as their mother's medical history was being actively changed in the hospital's database. They're erasing any connection to Project Phoenix, Emma explained, fingers flying across the keyboard. Replacing it with standard treatment protocols, making it look like she was never part of the experimental program. Can you stop it? Daniel asked. Better, Emma's face took on a fierce concentration. I can trace it. The access is coming from the Winchester family estate in Newport. Victoria's private office, Catherine confirmed. She has a secure terminal there. One that's not supposed to exist. Sarah felt a cold determination settle over her. Then that's where we need to go. It's suicide, Daniel protested. The estate is like a fortress. Not for me, Catherine said quietly. I still have access. Mother never changed the security protocols, her pride wouldn't let her admit I'd actually betrayed her. Even if we get in, Emma asked, what's the plan? Sarah touched her mother's locket. We filmed Victoria confessing. If we confront her with everything we know, all the evidence, she's already cracking under pressure. One push might be all it takes. She's still my mother, Catherine said softly, then straightened her shoulders. But Clara was my daughter. And I choose justice for Clara. Daniel's phone buzzed again, another message from his media contacts. Winchester Industries stock is in free fall. The board is calling for Victoria's resignation, but she's refusing to step down. She'll burn the whole company down before she admits defeat, Catherine said. That's who she is. Who she's always been. Sarah looked around at their unlikely alliance, a crusading journalist, a tech genius, a whistleblower daughter of privilege, and herself, the waitress who had dared to stand up to power. Then we make sure the truth burns brighter. Emma's laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Lisa Torres. Shin didn't kill himself. I have proof. Security camera footage from his house shows two men entering an hour before his death. I recognize them, they work for Victoria's private security team. The pieces were falling into place. They had evidence of medical fraud, corporate corruption, and now murder. But they needed Victoria's confession to tie it all together. When do we move? Daniel asked. Sarah looked at the setting sun over Boston Harbor. Tonight. Before she can destroy any more evidence. Before anyone else dies to protect her secrets. Catherine pulled out her phone. I'll call the estate, tell them I'm coming home to support Mother during this difficult time. Her smile was razor sharp. After all, family should stick together in a crisis. As they began planning their infiltration of the Winchester estate, Sarah received one final text from Bradley. I know what you're planning. Be careful. When Mother's cornered, she's at her most dangerous. But I can help. Let me make things right. Sarah showed the message to the others. Can we trust him? Emma asked. No, Catherine replied immediately. But we can use him. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again over Boston, as if nature itself was preparing for the showdown to come. In a few hours, they would be back in Newport, back where it all began. And this time, Sarah wasn't going to leave until justice was served, not just for her mother, but for Clara, for Lisa Torres, and for every other victim of Victoria Winchester's ruthless ambition. The Queen of Newport's high society was about to learn that some things really couldn't be bought, controlled, or buried. Some things, like the truth, demanded to be free. The night air was thick with tension as Catherine's Mercedes glided through the ornate gates of Hampton Manor. Sarah, crouched in the back seat hidden under a blanket with Emma, felt her heart pounding as they passed the spot where she had parked her old Honda Civic that fateful night of the party. Security is heavier than usual, Catherine murmured, nodding to the armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Mother's paranoid, but that works in our favor. She's not expecting an inside job. Through their earpieces, they heard Daniel's voice from his position in a surveillance van parked down the street. Grace just confirmed, the police are standing by with the warrant, but they'll wait for our signal. We need that confession. Catherine pulled up to the main entrance, where Victoria Winchester herself stood waiting, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. Sarah held her breath as Catherine stepped out of the car. Darling, Victoria's voice carried clearly through Catherine's hidden microphone. I knew you'd come home eventually. Family is everything, after all. Of course, Mother, Catherine embraced her with practiced ease. I saw the news. That awful Sarah Mitchell girl, and now poor Mr. Chen. I couldn't stay away. Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved in a cold smile. Come inside. There's much to discuss. As Catherine followed her mother into the mansion, Sarah and Emma silently slipped out of the car, using the distraction to make their way to the service entrance where Bradley had promised to leave a door unlocked. I've accessed the mansion's security system, Emma whispered, her tablet showing various camera feeds. But some areas are on a separate network, including Mother's private office. They found the service door unlocked as promised. Inside, the mansion's opulent halls were eerily quiet. Through their earpieces, they could hear Victoria and Catherine's conversation in the main study. The board is in chaos, Victoria was saying. They actually suggested I step down. As if this empire I built could survive without me. And Bradley? Catherine's voice was carefully neutral. Your brother made his choice, Victoria's tone hardened. He'll learn what happens to those who betray family. Sarah and Emma carefully made their way upstairs, following the blueprint Bradley had provided. Victoria's private office was on the third floor, in a wing Sarah had never seen during her time dating Bradley. Wait, Emma grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her into a shadow as two security guards passed by. Once they were gone, Emma pointed to her tablet. That office, it's not just on a separate network. It's got its own power supply, its own security system. Whatever's in there, she really doesn't want anyone to find it. Through their earpieces, they heard Catherine skillfully steering the conversation. Is it true what they're saying about Project Phoenix, Mother? About Clara? A long pause. Then Victoria's voice, sharp as a blade, Clara was weak. Just like her mother. The treatment would have been wasted on her. Sarah felt sick. Even Catherine's measured breathing suggested she was struggling to maintain composure. Movement on the west side, Daniel's voice crackled in their ears. Bradley just arrived. Right on cue, they heard commotion from downstairs. Mother! Bradley's voice rang out. We need to talk. Perfect timing, Emma murmured as they reached the office door. While Victoria was distracted by Bradley's arrival, Emma quickly connected her equipment to the office's security panel. Inside, the office was a testament to power: dark wood, leather furniture, and walls lined with awards and photographs chronicling Victoria Winchester's rise to prominence. Emma immediately went to work on the computer while Sarah began photographing documents laid out on the desk. Got it, Emma whispered triumphantly. I'm in her private server. Sarah, look at this. The screen showed emails dating back years, documenting a pattern of corruption far beyond Project Phoenix. There were other medical trials, other cover-ups, other lives destroyed in Victoria Winchester's relentless pursuit of power and profit. Suddenly, their earpieces crackled with Catherine's urgent whisper, she's coming up. They heard Victoria's voice, growing closer, enough of this family drama. There's something I need to check in my office. Sarah and Emma frantically looked for a hiding place, but the office was too minimal, too perfectly organized. Just as the door handle began to turn, the lights in the hallway went out. What's happening? Victoria's sharp voice demanded. Power failure in the East Wing, Mrs. Winchester, a security guard reported. Backup generators should. No. Victoria's voice held real fear for the first time. Check the office. Now. But before anyone could reach the door, Bradley's voice cut through the darkness. Looking for these, Mother? Through their earpieces, they heard him rustling papers. Copies of all your private files. Amazing what people keep in their desk drawers. Bradley, Victoria's voice was deadly quiet. Think very carefully about what you're doing. I have been thinking, Bradley replied. About Clara. About Sarah's mother. About Lisa Torres. About Mr. Chen. How many people have died to protect your secrets, Mother? Sarah and Emma used the distraction to slip out of the office through a hidden door Catherine had told them about, a remnant from the mansion's Prohibition-era construction. They made their way down a narrow passage as the confrontation continued through their earpieces. Everything I did for this family, Victoria's voice was rising. I built this empire from nothing. I made the hard choices no one else would make. Choices? Catherine's voice joined in. Like choosing which patients would live or die. Like choosing to murder Mr. Chen? He was going to destroy everything. Victoria shouted, her composure finally cracking. They all were. Chen, with his sudden attack of conscience. Those patients and their lawsuits. That Mitchell girl with her evidence. I did what had to be done. I protected what I built. Sarah and Emma emerged from the hidden passage into the main hall just as Grace Chen's voice rang out, Victoria Winchester, you're under arrest. The lights came back on to reveal Grace standing with a team of FBI agents, their weapons drawn. Victoria stood at the top of the stairs, her perfect facade crumbling as she realized every word of her confession had been recorded. You, she snarled, seeing Sarah. You did this. You destroyed my family. No, Mother, Catherine stepped forward. You did that yourself. Every time you chose power over people. Every time you decided that lives were worth less than profits. As the FBI agents moved to arrest Victoria Winchester, Sarah watched the woman who had once humiliated her, who had played with lives like pieces on a chessboard, who had considered herself above justice. Now, as they led her away in handcuffs, she looked smaller somehow. Less regal. Just another criminal caught in their own web of lies. Bradley approached Sarah, his face haunted. I'm so sorry, he began. Save it, Sarah cut him off. Your testimony will help put her away. That's enough. Outside, reporters were already gathering, drawn by the sight of FBI vehicles at Hampton Manor. Emma's phone was buzzing with notifications as their evidence began hitting the media, proof of decades of corruption, medical fraud, and murder, all laid bare for the world to see. Catherine stood in the mansion's doorway, watching as her mother was led to a waiting FBI car. The truth really does set you free, she said quietly. Even if it burns everything down first. Sarah touched her mother's locket, thinking of all the lives that had led to this moment, her mother, Clara, Lisa Torres, Mr. Chen. Sometimes, she replied, things need to burn before they can be rebuilt. Dawn was breaking over Newport as Victoria Winchester took her last look at Hampton Manor through the window of an FBI vehicle. The empire she had built through corruption and cruelty was crumbling, but from its ashes, perhaps something better could rise, something built on truth, justice, and the strength of those who dared to stand up to power. The week following Victoria Winchester's arrest was a whirlwind of headlines, testimonies, and revelations that shook Newport's elite society to its core. Sarah watched from Margaret Crawford's brownstone as the empire she had helped topple continued to crumble, piece by carefully constructed piece. Winchester Industries stock crashes amid criminal investigation. Victoria Winchester denied bail, prosecutor cites flight risk. Hundreds of victims come forward in medical fraud case. Bradley Winchester turns state's evidence against mother. Emma had barely slept, coordinating with journalists and prosecutors to organize the mountain of evidence they had gathered. Her laptop screen showed dozens of open tabs, news articles, court documents, and emails from former Winchester employees finally ready to speak out. Another one, Emma announced, reading from her screen. Dr. James Morrison, former head of oncology at St. Clair's. He's willing to testify about how Victoria pressured him to falsify clinical trial results. Sarah nodded absently, her attention fixed on a different headline. Lisa Torres speaks out, my years in hiding from the Winchesters. The article included a photo of Lisa with her family, the people she'd been forced to abandon to protect them from Victoria's retribution. You should read this, Daniel said, handing Sarah the morning's Newport Daily News. The front page featured a letter from Bradley Winchester to the public. To the people of Newport and all those affected by my family's actions. I write this not to excuse my complicity, but to acknowledge it. I knew what was happening at St. Clair's. I knew about the falsified trials, the covered-up deaths, the lives destroyed. I knew, and I did nothing. Worse, I actively participated in my mother's schemes, using people's trust against them. To Sarah Mitchell, whom I genuinely cared for but ultimately betrayed, I'm sorry. You showed me that true strength lies not in power or wealth, but in the courage to stand up for what's right. Sarah put down the paper, her emotions too complicated to name. Catherine, who had been staying with them while the investigation continued, noticed her expression. He always was good with words, Catherine said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. But at least this time, he's using them for the truth. A knock at the door made everyone tense. They were still cautious, despite Victoria being in custody. It was Grace Chen, looking exhausted but satisfied. The grand jury just handed down the indictments, she announced. Victoria's facing multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and second-degree murder in Robert Chen's death. Bradley's getting a deal for his cooperation, but he's still looking at 5 to 10 years. And the victims? Sarah asked. Grace's expression softened. The FBI's forensic accountants found offshore accounts worth billions. It'll take time, but that money will go to a victim's compensation fund. It won't bring anyone back, but it's justice, Catherine finished. Or as close as we can get. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of her mother in her hospital bed at St. Clair's, smiling despite her illness. Below it was a message, "Found this in the hospital archives. Thought you should have it. B. There's something else," Grace said, pulling out a file. "We found Victoria's private records. Sarah, your mother wasn't randomly selected for Project Phoenix. Victoria specifically chose her." Sarah felt the room spin. "What?" "Your mother was a registered nurse before she got sick," Grace explained. She had filed complaints about suspicious deaths at another Winchester-owned facility. Victoria saw her illness as an opportunity for revenge. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time, she had thought her mother was just another victim of Victoria's greed. But it had been personal, a calculated act of cruelty against someone who had tried to expose the truth years before. "Sarah?" Emma touched her sister's arm, concerned. "I'm okay," Sarah said, surprised to find that she meant it. "Mom died fighting for the truth. We finished what she started." Catherine's phone chimed with a news alert. "They're starting to unseal the records from all Winchester medical facilities. Thousands of cases, decades of cover-ups. It's going to be a long fight," Daniel warned. "Victoria still has allies. Powerful people who benefited from her schemes." "Then we keep fighting," Sarah said firmly. "For every family that lost someone. For every whistleblower who was silenced. For every truth that was buried." Emma's laptop pinged with a new email from Lisa Torres. "You need to see this," Emma said, her eyes widening as she read. Lisa found Victoria's personal diary. It details everything, not just the medical fraud, but decades of corruption. Politicians she bribed, journalists she threatened, families she destroyed. "The gift that keeps on giving," Grace murmured, already thinking of the new investigations this would spawn. Margaret brought in coffee and her famous homemade cookies, reminding them all that they had barely eaten in days. As they gathered around her dining room table, the unlikely teen that had brought down an empire, Sarah felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. "What happens now?" she asked no one in particular. "Now," Catherine said, "we rebuild." Winchester Industries employed thousands of innocent people. They deserve a chance to be part of something better. The board's preparing to vote on new leadership, Daniel added. They're talking about transforming the medical research division into a non-profit, dedicated to transparent, ethical drug development. Sarah's phone buzzed again, another message from Bradley. "They're letting me testify via video link tomorrow. I'll tell them everything." It's not much, but it's a start. Looking around the table at her newfound family, Emma's fierce intelligence, Daniel's unwavering integrity, Catherine's hard-won wisdom, Grace's dedication to justice, Margaret's quiet strength, Sarah realized that something extraordinary had emerged from the ashes of Victoria Winchester's empire. "You know," Margaret said, as if reading her thoughts, "some people spend their whole lives fighting for justice. Your mother did. And now, because of all of you, her fight wasn't in vain." Outside, the sun was setting over Providence, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in a federal detention center, Victoria Winchester was facing her first night without power, without control, without the empire she had built on other people's pain. But in Margaret Crawford's warm kitchen, surrounded by truth-tellers and justice-seekers, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected to find in this journey: peace. They had one, not just for themselves, but for every victim, every whistleblower, every person who had ever stood up to power and paid the price. The poor girl who revealed the cruel truth about the rich had become something more, a symbol of hope for those who still fought in the shadows, waiting for their chance to speak truth to power. To justice, Catherine raised her coffee cup. To truth, Daniel added. To Mom, Emma said softly. Sarah touched her mother's locket, now containing not just the USB drive that had started it all, but also the newly discovered photo of her mother's brave smile. To all of them, she said. And to all who come after. 3 months after Victoria Winchester's arrest, Sarah stood at the podium in front of the newly renamed Claire Thompson Memorial Hospital, formerly Street Claire's, preparing to address the crowd gathered for its reopening. The autumn breeze carried the scent of new beginnings as she looked out at the faces before her, former patients, whistleblowers, families of victims, and survivors of Victoria Winchester's reign. My mother once told me, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about truth, transparency, and trust. Today, we reclaim this hospital in the name of those principles, and in memory of every life touched by the choices made within these walls. Catherine Winchester, now the head of the newly established Winchester Medical Ethics Foundation, stood beside her. The past months had transformed the former heiress. Gone was the polished society woman, replaced by someone more genuine, more determined. The foundation's first initiative, Catherine announced, will be fully funded scholarships for children of Project Phoenix victims who wish to pursue medical careers. We're calling it the Clara Winchester Memorial Scholarship, in memory of my daughter and all the children who deserved better. From her seat in the front row, Emma wiped away tears. She had spent weeks working with the hospital's new IT team, designing a transparent patient tracking system that would make it impossible to hide or falsify medical trials ever again. Beside her sat Lisa Torres, now the hospital's patient advocate, ensuring that every voice would be heard. The ceremony was being covered by every major news outlet, with Daniel Crawford coordinating the press coverage. His series of articles exposing the Winchester scandal had won him a Pulitzer nomination, but more importantly, it had sparked investigations into similar practices at other private hospitals across the country. Mrs. Winchester, a reporter called out as Sarah concluded her speech, "How does it feel to be appointed to the hospital's new ethics board?" Sarah still wasn't used to being addressed so formally. "It feels like responsibility," she answered honestly. "Every decision we make here will impact real lives. We owe it to every patient, every family, to do better." The headlines from that morning's papers were still fresh in everyone's minds. Victoria Winchester sentenced to 25 years. Bradley Winchester begins testimony in congressional hearing on medical fraud. Winchester Industries announces complete restructuring under new leadership. After the ceremony, they gathered in what had once been Victoria's private boardroom, now transformed into a memorial wall displaying photographs of Project Phoenix victims. Sarah found herself standing before her mother's picture, remembering the woman who had taught her to stand up for what was right. "You would be proud, Mom," she whispered, touching the locket that still hung around her neck. "She already was," came a voice behind her. Grace Chen approached, holding a file. "We found this in Victoria's personal records. It's your mother's original complaint about the suspicious deaths she witnessed. Listen to this part. I know speaking up may cost me everything, but if we don't stand for what's right in medicine, we stand for nothing at all." Sarah read the document with trembling hands. Her mother's words, written years before she would become a victim of the system she tried to expose, seemed to reach across time with newfound meaning. "There's more," Grace continued. "Your mother wasn't alone. We found a network of nurses and staff who had been sharing information, building a case. Victoria didn't just target your mother, she systematically destroyed everyone who tried to expose the truth. Until now," Catherine added, joining them. "The Foundation's legal team is working to clear the names of every whistleblower Victoria discredited. Some of them lost their medical licenses, their reputations. Their lives," Sarah finished softly, thinking of Robert Chen and others who had paid the ultimate price for speaking up. Emma burst into the room, her laptop clutched to her chest. "You need to see this," she announced, setting up her computer. Bradley's testimony just finished. He didn't just talk about Project Phoenix, he exposed decades of corporate corruption. Names, dates, offshore accounts. They watched as Bradley Winchester, looking older and more subdued in his prison jumpsuit, detailed the intricate web of corruption his mother had woven. His testimony implicated dozens of prominent figures, judges, politicians, business leaders who had enabled or profited from Victoria's schemes. "The dominoes are falling," Daniel observed, making notes for his next article. Victoria's conviction was just the beginning. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, "Turn on the news." Channel 7. They gathered around the boardroom's television to see breaking news. The FBI was raiding offices across the country, acting on Bradley's testimony. The camera showed agents leaving various corporate headquarters with boxes of documents. "It's happening everywhere," Grace explained. "Other families like the Winchesters, other hospitals like St. Clair's. Your story opened the floodgates." Catherine's phone chimed with an email. "The board just approved our proposal," she announced. "Full transparency in all medical research, independent oversight, and a patient advocacy council with real power." And the other Winchester properties? Sarah asked. Being converted into affordable housing and community health centers, Catherine replied. It's time the Winchester fortune served the people it was built by exploiting. As the sun set over Newport, casting long shadows through the hospital's newly renovated halls, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that humiliating night at Hampton Manor to this moment of transformation, every step had been guided by the simple, powerful force of truth. You know, Lisa said, joining them by the memorial wall, when I was in hiding, I used to dream about justice. But this is better than justice. This is change. Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They hadn't just exposed one family's corruption, they had sparked a movement. Across the country, other whistleblowers were coming forward, other victims were finding their voices, other wrongs were being righted. To think, Emma mused, it all started with a USB drive and a sister's determination. No, Sarah corrected gently, looking at the faces on the memorial wall, her mother, Clara Winchester, Robert Chen, and countless others whose stories had finally been told. It started with their courage. We just finished what they began. As they left the hospital that evening, Sarah paused to look back at the building silhouetted against the twilight sky. Where Victoria Winchester had built an empire of secrets and lies, they were building something new, a legacy of truth, transparency, and healing. The poor girl who revealed the cruel truth about the rich had become something more, a guardian of that truth, ensuring that power would never again silence those who dared to speak up. 1 year to the day after Victoria Winchester's arrest, Sarah Mitchell stood once again in the grand ballroom of Hampton Manor. But this time, the mansion wasn't hosting a society gala, it had been transformed into a community center, its opulent rooms now serving as meeting spaces, counseling offices, and support group venues for victims of corporate fraud and medical malpractice. Strange to be back here, Emma said, joining her sister by the same window where Sarah had once stood in her waitress uniform, dreaming of acceptance into a world that had been built on lies. Everything's different now, Sarah replied, watching as former patients and their families filled the ballroom for the first annual Winchester Victims' Rights Conference. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled, but they now illuminated a very different gathering. Catherine approached them, looking relaxed in business casual attire, a far cry from her former designer wardrobe. The last of the settlements was finalized this morning, she announced. Every victim of Project Phoenix or their families will receive full compensation. And Victoria? Emma asked. Still appealing her conviction, Catherine shrugged. But with Bradley's testimony and the evidence we found, she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. The sound of feedback from a microphone drew their attention to the podium, where Daniel Crawford stood ready to begin the conference. The past year had been busy for him, his exposé had sparked similar investigations nationwide, leading to what the media was calling the Great Medical Reform. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel began, a year ago, a small group of determined individuals stood up against one of the most powerful families in America. They showed us that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the light. Sarah watched as Lisa Torres took the stage to share her story, followed by other survivors and whistleblowers. Each testimony added another piece to the larger picture of corruption they had helped expose. Grace Chen, recently promoted to chief prosecutor, slipped into the seat beside Sarah. Just got word from Washington, she whispered. The Medical Transparency Act passed the Senate. Starting next year, all private hospitals will be subject to the same oversight we implemented at Claire Thompson Memorial. Sarah touched her mother's locket, which now contained not the USB drive that had started it all, but the photograph of her mother and a small piece of paper with her written complaint about medical fraud. A reminder of where this journey had begun. Bradley had sent a letter to be read at the conference, his last public statement before beginning his reduced 7-year sentence. To all those gathered today, power corrupts not just those who wield it, but those who inherit it. I was born into a system of privilege built on others' pain, and for too long, I chose comfort over conscience. It took the courage of someone who had every reason to hate us, Sarah Mitchell, to show me that real strength lies in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. The Winchester name will forever be associated with corruption and cruelty. That is our legacy, and our burden to bear. But thanks to Catherine's work with the foundation, and to all of you who refuse to be silenced, perhaps it can also become a reminder that change is possible, that truth can prevail, and that justice, though delayed, will not be denied. with deep remorse and hope for the future. Bradley Winchester. Margaret Crawford, who had turned her brownstone into a safe house network for whistleblowers, sat in the front row, beaming with pride at what her revolution children had accomplished. "You know," Catherine mused, watching as more people shared their stories, "Mother always said the Winchester name meant power." But she was wrong. Real power isn't in silencing others, it's in giving them a voice. Emma's laptop chimed with a news alert. Another major hospital chain was under investigation, its CEO reportedly fleeing the country as evidence of medical fraud emerged. "It never ends, does it?" she sighed. "No," Sarah replied, "but now they know they can't hide anymore. Every victim has a voice. Every truth has a chance." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah took the podium for the closing speech. Looking out at the faces before her, the survivors, the fighters, the truth-tellers, she felt the weight of the journey that had brought them here. "A year ago, I stood in this room as a waitress who dared to dream of something better," she began. "I thought that meant becoming part of the Winchester world. Instead, it meant exposing that world for what it really was. But this story isn't about the Winchesters anymore. It's about every person who ever stood up to power and paid the price. It's about every voice that was silenced, every truth that was buried, every life that was deemed expendable in the pursuit of profit." She touched her mother's locket before continuing, "My mother used to say that healing happens in the light." She wasn't just talking about medicine, she was talking about truth. About justice. About the courage to stand up and say no more. That's what we're building here, in this mansion that once symbolized power and privilege. A place of healing, of truth, of transformation. The setting sun streamed through the ballroom windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors where Sarah had once served champagne to Newport's elite. Now those same floors supported people working to ensure that no other family would suffer as theirs had. The poor girl who revealed the cruel truth about the rich, Sarah concluded, wasn't just one person. It was every nurse who filed a complaint. Every patient who questioned their treatment. Every family who refused to be bought off. Every whistleblower who chose truth over safety. This victory belongs to all of you. As applause filled the ballroom, Sarah looked at her unlikely family, Emma with her brilliant mind and fierce loyalty, Catherine with her hard-won wisdom, Daniel with his unwavering pursuit of truth, Grace with her dedication to justice, Margaret with her revolutionary spirit, and Lisa with her survivor's strength. Together, they had not just exposed corruption, they had sparked a movement. The Winchester scandal had become a catalyst for change, a reminder that even the most powerful could be held accountable when enough people refused to be silenced. Outside Hampton Manor, the Newport sun set on another day of truth and healing. The mansion's gates, once symbols of exclusion, now stood permanently open. Victoria Winchester's empire of secrets had crumbled, but from its ruins had risen something far more valuable, a legacy of truth, justice, and the power of ordinary people to change the world. Sarah touched her mother's locket one last time, feeling the weight of all it represented, not just the evidence that had started this journey, but the courage that had sustained it. In the end, the poor girl who revealed the cruel truth about the rich had discovered the greatest truth of all, that real power lies not in wealth or status, but in the strength to stand up for what's right. And that truth, unlike empires built on lies, would endure.